Hope you had a great 4th of July. I hope all your fingers are still firmly attached to your hand. And today I want to tell you about how you can get to senior engineer faster. This is one of the most common questions that I get. And a couple days ago, a mentee of mine who is now in the AI developer program in Parsity hit me up and said, "Hey man, how can I get to senior engineer at my company?" And I told him an answer that has almost nothing to do with writing better code. And in this episode, I want to break down a few things that I think you need to do. In fact, there are 3 things that you need to do, and the trap that almost every developer falls into when they're trying to level up, and why it's probably a worse strategy today than it was 3 years ago. Secondly, I want to cover the mental shift that separates developers who stay stuck from developers who get promoted, and the exact playbook I'd use to pull this off. And third, if your company is fumbling with its AI strategy right now, and most are, I'm going to show you how to turn that mess into a potential promotion. None of this requires you to grind LeetCode for 6 months or become the smartest person in your team. It works whether you're junior, mid-level, or senior, and you're maybe trying to get to staff or engineering manager or whatever. Let's get into it. So first, let's cover the trap that most people fall into, including myself. So back to this mentee, he asked me, "Hey, how can I get to senior?" We pulled up his company's engineering ladder. And if you haven't seen one, it's basically like this rubric that spells out what each level looks like and what it takes to move up into each level. I've seen dozens of these. I've actually helped create one for Clorox, and they're all kind of the same, if I'm being completely honest here. He had already decided what he needed to do at this point. He's like, "I got to get better at programming. I got to get better at my programming language and this framework and all these things." That's not wrong, right? That's not wrong at all. It's just incomplete. You cannot be bad at programming and expect to be a senior engineer. You have to know your fundamentals, you have to know your language, and you have to care about the quality of what you ship. This is table stakes stuff. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not going to pretend that AI just makes this all nonsense, right? But think about when this deep technical expertise actually is visible, right? Somebody maybe has a really, really hairy production bug. Something critical blows up at a time when it should not. And then that very technical person swoops in and they save the day, and now they add that to their highlight reel. Now ask yourself, what happens if somebody else gets there first? What happens when AI tools help a mid-level developer untangle that bug before the super senior person opens their laptop? The moments where your technical depth are visible get less frequent and are more competitive. So if your entire promotion strategy is, "I'm going to be the person that solves the hardest problems," you're betting your career on situations that are kind of shrinking. I don't see this as some doom and gloom statement at all either. I actually think this opens up a better path that I want to break down. So if you stop asking yourself, "Hey, how do I get really, really, really good at writing code?" and you start asking yourself, "How do I multiply the output of my team?" This gives you a very strong basis and foundation. It's a completely different question that most of us don't really ask ourselves. So where do you look to multiply the output of the team? Don't just chase code quality, because everyone defines it differently, and it's really hard to measure anyway. It's really hard to go back to your manager and say, "Well, my code quality is really, really high. Where's that promotion, bub?" Right? Look at things that people can actually see on a dashboard: outages, code churn, how fast your team ships, work that moves revenue, aka makes money. Honestly, if you just find one thing that's slower or messier than it needs to be, then target that aggressively. Maybe your team has a really slow release process. Maybe you're releasing once every 2 weeks, or maybe you're releasing after a really long QA process, or maybe you find that code reviews are the bottleneck. Find whatever thing it is that is slowing your team down and think, how could I potentially fix that? Now, this idea of multiplying yourself used to be really, really difficult. It used to mean you had to have a lunch and learn. Nobody shows up. You would document stuff that nobody would read. You would do knowledge transfer sessions that 2 weeks later, everybody would kind of forget what you told them. Today, it's really simple. You can write a markdown file. You can drop it into your GitHub repo, and your team benefits immediately. You can build things like skills for the coding agents that your team uses, and you can put your standards or standards that you've adopted from other places into your team's agent configurations. And now every developer basically has your judgment or whatever kind of rules you want to enforce. This is by far the quickest way to quote unquote scale yourself in an afternoon for basically free. Here's where people get this wrong. They build the skills file, they open up a PR, somebody approves it, boom, it's in there. And now people are complaining saying, "Hey, wait a second, who built these skills and why are they here?" I actually don't like these conventions, right? I didn't agree to this. Who put this in here? Instead, do this. Before you build anything, post in a public channel, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever you're using, and take 5 minutes and just say, hey, I noticed we're losing time doing X or whatever, or I thought we could fix this thing by doing Y. I'd love to get some feedback before I implement this. Now you're not just the person who spotted the problem, but you're also the person who is organizing the fix. And here's the really, really cool part. You don't even have to be the one that implements it, right? The credit that you're going to get comes from noticing the problem and bringing it to the table. Think about this. Your engineering manager or your CTO might not be able to code as well as you, right? They might not know React. They might not know Node or Express or whatever, right? But they're responsible for bringing your team the problems that you're going to solve. They're paid an outrageous salary because the impact they have is large. It spans across the organization. If you start thinking a little bit like that, how can I bring up problems that span outside of me and affect my team? And then how can I bring other people into the problem, tell them about it, and then whoever fixes it doesn't really matter. The real power play, the real power move is that you've identified something and now you're bringing it up to be fixed. And once you do fix this, the job is not done. You want the visibility. So you report back how it's improved in a public channel. For example, hey, since we introduced these agent skills, our PRs have dropped by 30%, right? The churn rate on our code has dropped by X, Y, and Z. If you don't know where to find these stats, you can look in GitHub, you can look in Jira or Linear or whatever type of productivity tool your team is using. If you think and do this stuff, you're starting to basically operate like a manager before you have the title. You're finding problems that nobody technically assigned to you. You're measuring the impact of those problems, and you're telling people what changed. This tells people that you're senior no matter what level you currently are. And then when promotion season comes around, you've got a stack of receipts and public examples of you doing the thing. Doing really, really good work that nobody knows about is one of the most frustrating things that I've seen as a manager when it comes to promotion season, because people say, well, I did all this stuff, right? I wrote really good code. I did this feature. And I'm like, yeah, those are all good things. You took a ticket that you were assigned and you did that ticket. There's nothing wrong with that. We need average developers. We need people just pushing tickets across the finish line. But if you want that accelerated track towards a promotion, you really got to do more. And you got to do it publicly to help build up that credibility, right? You need to make it so easy for your manager or team lead or whoever to look at you and say, wow, that person did a lot of stuff. They're always active. They're looking for problems that I didn't assign to them. They're doing their work, and they're making the team better as a result of them being here. That is super senior level thinking. Now let's move into part 3. Most companies right now fall into 2 buckets when it comes to AI. Either total chaos, right? Meaning every team is using different tools and no standards, or they got burned by a failed rollout and they don't really want to use AI anymore. And now leadership is a little more nervous about letting people use AI, and maybe they're actually pushing back on it. If you're aiming for senior, I think both of these scenarios have amazing opportunities for you. If you're aiming for senior or whatever, start small. Build some skills files for your agents. Help your team standardize on what models you're going to use for which tasks. Bring order to the chaos. This is small, it's visible, and people will notice at least that you're thinking through these problems. If you're aiming for staff or management positions, go bigger. Look at what the company is actually paying for and where the waste is. Find places where RAG pipelines or agents solve business problems and not just demos, right? This is a lot longer path, but it puts you in rooms where decisions get made. Meaning if the company is struggling to find ROI on their AI investment, meaning they've spent money on the tools, on the models, people have subscriptions, but they're actively and openly saying, we don't really see the return on our investment, or it's not clear, this is where you can make kind of a bold move. And obviously this requires some foundational knowledge about like, how do you build a RAG pipeline? How do you build agents? Is there a way for us to consolidate around a single model? Can we use some sort of open source model? Can we have a local LLM? What are some things we're struggling with? What are some things that you know how to do that can move the needle in whatever direction the company wants to go? Maybe they're trying to increase the speed at which you guys work. Maybe they're trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into their product. These are 2 very different paths with many, many ways that you can achieve them. But you'll just have to have some of this foundational knowledge. If you're looking for ways to actually get that return on investment as far as speed, that can be skills files. That can be AI workflows that you share with the team. That can be AI peer reviews from things like CodeRabbit or something like that. Like, always look for off-the-shelf solutions to these problems. If they're looking for things like, hey, we need to build a product and all they have is a chat bot that's bolted onto their public-facing website, well, that's not really an AI strategy, right? If you say, what about using RAG, right? We have all this information. Maybe we could surface it through RAG. And they say, hey, what's that? And then you go into, hey, here's how we can do that at the company, or even organize a hackathon, which is probably one of the most high leverage moves that you could make, right? You take a known problem in the company, and if you have no clue how to solve it, you say, let's get product, engineering, somebody from leadership, and let's build solutions around these problems with specific tools and then vote on the results. You organize into small teams, you take a big cloudy problem, and you say, let's solve it. Everybody's going to take a little swing at this problem, right? Half the value isn't even really what gets built. You're the person who organized it and get people moving and doing something about it rather than just sitting there spinning their wheels and thinking and reading articles and posting things in Slack about OpenClaw or whatever. Like, no, let's sit down and build the thing. That's what true leadership looks like, and you don't have to have the title to do the thing. So just to recap, going super deep on your technical skills alone is not just a shrinking path, but it's not the only path, right? The moments where that depth is visible are getting rarer. The shift is moving from how do I get really, really better at doing this thing to how do I multiply the output of my team? And the playbook is semi-simple. Spot a problem, get buy-in publicly, execute it, and then report the results with numbers. And if your company's AI situation is a mess, then use that mess as a foundation to provide a solution. If you do this really, really well, one of two things can happen. Either you build enough credibility that the promotion becomes super obvious and you get it, or you build a track record that travels with you and you can just go somewhere else, right? This is something that's not just going to be valuable at that company. It's going to either set you up there or set you up for the next place. And if you do want to go deeper on the technical side of AI stuff, like building RAG pipelines, agents, MCP, all the stuff that lets you actually build a strategy with your team, that's exactly what we teach inside Parsity. The link is in the show notes as always, and I always hope you find that helpful. See you around.